The card game that predicted the future. Is it a real possibility, or just a figment of humanity's imagination? A mere urban legend? Is this rumor ultimately a good thing or a bad thing? Tonight, once again, we'll examine whether it's true or not from a Japanese perspective. What if the biggest secret in modern conspiracy history wasn't hidden in a government vault, but sitting in a card game box, sold at hobby shops across America since 1994? A card, 2 towers, flames pouring out of the side of one of them. Drawn 7 years before September 11th, 2001. Nobody forced you to believe it. Nobody had to. Somebody just had to show you the card and let your own eyes do the rest. Today, unopened decks of this game sell for over $2,000 on eBay. Not because it's rare, because people are convinced that somewhere, inside 330 painted cards, sits a roadmap of the future, drawn by someone who shouldn't have known what was coming. They call it the Illuminati card game. And 30 years later, the internet still can't stop arguing about what it actually is. There's a very specific kind of urban legend that refuses to die, not because it involves ghosts or monsters or things hiding in the dark, but because the evidence is something you can hold in your own 2 hands. That's exactly what makes the Illuminati card game different from almost every other conspiracy theory out there. This isn't secondhand testimony. This isn't a blurry photo or a decades-old rumor passed down through unreliable memory. This is a physical object, mass-produced, sold in stores, photographed a million times over on forums, on Reddit, on TikTok. Anyone can go buy a copy right now and hold the so-called prophecy in their own hands. And when people started laying these cards side by side with real headlines, a burning building here, a massed crowd there, a demagogue rising to power in another, the pattern felt too specific to be nothing. Which raises the question that's kept this legend alive for 3 decades. How do you explain away a prediction you're holding in your hand? To understand how this legend started, you have to go back to 1994, a very specific moment in American conspiracy culture. Steve Jackson Games, a small tabletop publisher, released a card game called Illuminati, New World Order. It wasn't the company's first attempt at the concept. A board game version had existed back in 1982, inspired by a cult conspiracy novel trilogy from the 1970s. But the 1994 version was different. It was designed as satire, a game where players controlled shadowy, over-the-top secret societies. The Bavarian Illuminati, rogue UFO cults, even a group openly modeled after H.P. Lovecraft's fictional Cthulhu mythos. Players competed to secretly manipulate world events, using cards representing disasters, media control, and global chaos, racing to seize control of the planet before their opponents. It was tongue-in-cheek by design. One of the writers involved with the project, Robert Shea, who had co-written the original conspiracy novels that inspired the game, even joked directly in the rulebook that maybe the real Illuminati really was behind the game itself, because by definition, they're behind everything. It was a joke, a wink to the players. Conspiracy theory as entertainment. Nobody involved with making that game could have predicted what would happen to it. Decades later, once the internet learned how to zoom in. 4 years after its release, Illuminati, New World Order sat quietly in the world of tabletop gaming, beloved by a niche fanbase, but far from a cultural phenomenon. Then September 11th, 2001 happened, and somewhere, someone remembered a specific card sitting in a box on their shelf. A card called Terrorist Nuke, drawn 7 years earlier, in 1994. 2 rectangular towers, side by side. One of them exploding, flames pouring out from a point partway up its height. Once that image started circulating next to real photographs from that morning, the internet exploded with a single, chilling question. How did they know? From there, the theory didn't just survive, it grew. Believers began combing through the game's other 330 cards, searching for more matches. An epidemic card, showing figures in masks and gloves, surrounded by body bags, which believers would later connect directly to COVID-19, decades before the pandemic began. A charismatic leader card, depicting a blonde-haired demagogue rallying a crowd, which some online communities insist bears an unmistakable resemblance to a certain future American president. A March on Washington card, showing chaos and crowds converging on the nation's capital, a card some believers now directly tie to the events of January 6, 2021, nearly 3 decades after the card was printed. Each new real-world event seemed to unlock another card, another supposed prophecy, another reason to believe this wasn't satire at all, that it was something closer to a leaked itinerary of the future, hidden in plain sight inside a hobby shop card game. And then, conspiracy researchers found something that seemed to confirm their darkest suspicions. In 1990, 4 years before this specific card game was even published, Steve Jackson Games had been raided by the United States Secret Service. Computers seized, hard drives confiscated, the company nearly driven into bankruptcy by the legal fallout. To believers, that raid became the missing piece. Proof that federal agents already knew something about what this company was involved with, that the raid wasn't a coincidence, but an attempt to shut down or seize control of material the company shouldn't have had access to in the first place. The real explanation for that raid is almost aggressively mundane by comparison, and we'll get to it. But by the time most people online encounter this story, the raid, the Towers card, and the eerily specific illustrations have already fused into a single, unshakable narrative. This game knew something it shouldn't have. So let's break this down properly. Because there are competing explanations here, and not all of them are as easily dismissed as skeptics might like. The historical explanation starts with simple timing. The Illuminati card game wasn't published in a vacuum in 1994. It came out 1 year after the first World Trade Center bombing in 1993, when the towers were already a widely publicized target of terrorism in the news. Under this reading, a card depicting an attack on tall buildings wasn't prophecy. It was a reasonable extrapolation of a threat that had already made international headlines the year before. The psychological explanation focuses on something deeper, the human brain's near-compulsive need to find patterns, even inside randomness. Researchers call this apophenia, the tendency to perceive meaningful connections between unrelated things. With 330 separate cards, each depicting a different flavor of disaster, scandal, or societal collapse, statisticians point out that some of those illustrations were always going to end up resembling real future events, purely by the sheer volume of dystopian scenarios the game covers. The scientific explanation leans on the same math, phrased differently. A card game built entirely around themes of epidemics, terrorism, authoritarian leaders, and civil unrest is, by design, covering the most common categories of real-world crisis. Over a long enough timeline, some of those genre-standard illustrations were statistically almost guaranteed to land close to something that actually happened. The paranormal explanation is where true believers plant their flag, the idea that specific individuals, whether through genuine premonition or some form of unconscious foresight, can produce imagery that ends up eerily accurate, without any conscious awareness of why. Under this theory, the illustrators themselves may not have known they were tapping into anything unusual, but something about the specific combination of imagery, drawn at that particular place and time, proved impossible to fully explain away as coincidence. And then there's the conspiracy explanation, the version that refuses to die no matter how many designers explain themselves. That the game's creators, or someone connected to them, had access to real inside knowledge of events being planned years in advance, and encoded that knowledge into the game, either as a warning, a confession, or simply because secret organizations, by their nature, enjoy leaving fingerprints in places nobody expects to look. Here's what the people who actually created this game have said, on the record, when asked directly about the predictions. The illustrator behind the terrorist nuke card has said the imagery was directly inspired by post-Soviet terrorism anxieties circulating at the time, specifically citing groups like Hamas as the real-world reference point he had in mind while designing the card, not any mystical foresight about a specific future date. A former employee closely tied to the game's development compared the entire phenomenon to the way psychic predictions work in general, pointing out that if you predict a Middle Eastern leader will be killed sometime in the next year, you have a decent chance of eventually being right, simply because of how frequently that category of event actually occurs in the real world. As for that infamous 1990 Secret Service raid, the real story has nothing to do with prophecy at all. It's centered on a company employee who was, separately, a well-known computer hacker wanted for distributing stolen documents on an underground hacking bulletin board. The raid targeted that individual's activity, not the card game, which wouldn't even be published for another 4 years. So why does the theory persist, even with the creators themselves explaining it, on record, repeatedly, for decades? Because explaining a coincidence rarely feels as satisfying as believing in a secret. Let's look at what still keeps this legend breathing, even after every mundane explanation has been laid out clearly. The first contradiction is the raid's timeline itself. Believers frequently cite the 1990 Secret Service raid as evidence the company had foreknowledge tied to the card game. But the raid happened 4 years before the specific card game in question was even created. That timeline gap alone should collapse the entire theory. And yet, in the retelling, that detail gets quietly smoothed over more often than not. The second is the sheer volume of source material. With over 330 individual cards, each depicting a different disaster, scandal, or societal collapse scenario, the game essentially guaranteed some level of eventual real-world overlap through pure statistical inevitability. Believers tend to highlight the handful of cards that match dramatic headlines, while quietly ignoring the hundreds of others that never lined up with anything at all. The third is the confirmation problem, the same psychological trap that fuels nearly every prophecy-based urban legend. Once someone is primed to look for a match, ambiguous imagery becomes remarkably easy to force into alignment with real events after the fact, even when the original illustration was never intended to depict anything that's specific in the first place. And the deepest unanswered question in this entire legend isn't really about the cards at all. It's about us. Why do millions of people, presented with a clear, on-the-record explanation from the actual creators, still choose the secret society version instead? Maybe because a card game that accidentally guessed a handful of dystopian outcomes through statistics and satire is a far less satisfying story than one where somebody, somewhere, already knew exactly what was coming. You'd think a 30-year-old satirical card game would have faded into complete obscurity by now. It hasn't. If anything, its relevance has only grown. Unopened decks now sell for over $2,000 on auction sites, driven almost entirely by buyers convinced they're holding physical evidence of a hidden global plan. Social media has only accelerated the legend. A single viral clip pairing a decades-old card with a real headline can reach millions of viewers in a matter of hours, stripped of any of the context or explanation the original creators have repeatedly offered. And on a deeper level, this legend endures because it taps into something larger than one card game. Our collective discomfort with how chaotic and unpredictable the real world actually is. A universe where disasters happen randomly, without warning or design, is a genuinely unsettling place to live in. A universe where someone, somewhere, already knows what's coming next. Even a shadowy, secretive someone is, in a strange way, easier to accept.